and I'm going to hand over to Wendy, who will introduce herself and tell you all about the school nursing service. Over to you, Wendy.
Thank you very much. Hi, so my name's Wendy. I am the practice lead for the school nursing team here in Herefordshire. So hopefully I've had a little practice. I'm going to share my screen, my presentation with you. So hopefully you don't think it's death by PowerPoint. So I'm going to start from the beginning. That's a good place to start, isn't it? So I've titled it Delivering a School Nursing Service in the 21st Century, because that's where we are, and it's probably looking very different even from when I first started school nursing, which felt like a very, very long time ago now. Okay, so who are we, the school nurses? So school nurses, we are registered nurses with a specialist community health degree. We work within the team, which includes our school nurse assistants and our admin, who I think the team, it would fall apart without, she holds us together brilliantly. And even today, I've been school nursing since 2007. So many people do not know what school nurse does. They don't even know we exist anymore, but we are here. And the numbers on our caseloads have changed drastically over the time. Our role has changed over the time. We are public health nurses, as I said, and we generally work to the public health agenda that's whatever's going on at the time. So for instance, back in 2007, CSE wasn't even on the radar. Now it's up there as one of the top things that we know lots and lots about and supporting young people with. So research for school nursing, into school nursing with children and young people that we work with is they're happy to have contact with the school nurse. In fact, the children and young people we work with, they know who we are and they know what we do. And the feedback is it is a positive experience with a healthcare professional. So firstly, I just want to dispel the myths. I say this every time somebody says to me, what do you do? And I say, I'm a school nurse. If I could change my name to something that everybody would know what I did, I would, but none of us have ever come up with a name that actually fits. So there you go. There's a challenge for you to start with. So dispelling the myths, we're not NIT nurses. Okay, we're not based in primarily in schools, and we do work all year round. We're all level 3 safeguarding trained with a wealth of knowledge and experience, and we work for children from school entry to 19 in mainstream and up to the age of 25 in the special schools and special education. So why are we here? Why do school nurses exist? Every child matters. We all have a duty of care. We know that. That's nothing new. But our school nursing role is for us to support children and young people to be healthy, to be safe, to enjoy their life and to achieve and make a positive contribution to their world, to their new world that they're growing up into. And obviously to achieve economic well-being. So when you see people grow and change and start to make a life for themselves after really difficult times, it really makes us glow. School nurses, we are a passionate bunch about what we do. We love what we do. We love to see that our children grow. When you've worked in one area for a while, like I have, and you see these children grow and they leave school and they're starting their lives, and you can see you've made a difference. So we do know we do some good out there, and sometimes it feels like it's really, really you're banging your head against a brick wall, I have to say, but actually it's not quite like that. We do love what we do. So what are we looking for? We're looking to promote the health of the children and young people we work with, protect them from harm. That's a lot of what we do, a lot of safeguarding and prevention of ill health. So the pandemic has hit all of us, but I'll go on to that in a little bit more detail in a bit later. So what sort of things do we work with children and young people? So in the public health agenda, it's lots of sexual health advice given in schools, dietary advice. We know obesity is huge. I think it's not something anybody doesn't know anything about. And I remember looking back at the stats years and years ago, and by 2025, which only a few years away, is 50% will be clinically obese. That's a lot of overweight people. And mental health, the pandemic has just highlighted that, as we know, to just disproportionate. It is really, really, it's hard going out there for these children and young people, and our job is hopefully to make them feel better. The Children Act of 2004. This is what they're looking for. This is what's out there for all of us. So we want the physical and mental health and emotional well-being of children and young people. to be a positive experience, to feel that they can live their life with good mental health. We tend to come into people's lives when they're at a more difficult time. Our job is to identify when we meet these young people in school, to actually support them, educate them, tell people where, to actually refer on if we need to, because we are level 1, but we quite often work at level 2 and we'll refer on at level 3. So the education, training, recreation for children and young people, the contribution that they make to society, and the social and economic well-being. So there's lots out there that Children Act say we should all be doing for our people, our children and young people. So public health nursing, which is what we are public health nurses. So if anybody asks me what I do, I quite often say I'm a public health nurse for school-aged children. It seems to get rid of that. I'm a NIT nurse, because okay, if you want to know about NITs, I can tell you about NITs. I'm expert on NITs, but that's because I was a mum. Well, still a mum. That's because I'm a mum, not because I'm a school nurse. Okay, so we work to levels of need to be able to prioritise, identify and assess the children and young people and the families that we work with. So every young person out there of school age comes in at universal level. So anybody can access us from professional agencies, they can refer themselves in, and then we go up to Universal Plus, Universal Partnership Plus. So these are tackling the more difficult cases, the more safeguarding issues that are going on. So Herefordshire's profile, I don't know whether anybody knows much about what Hereford's profile looks like. We are a rural county. I'm sure people who live here know that. We've got the 4th lowest population density in England, and 21%, so that's a fifth of the children make up our population. So that's a lot of children. That's a lot of children. 14% are on low incomes, and 34.3% of children from year 6 and 22.6 in year reception are obese. And this is one of our top priorities. And there's a lot of work going in at the moment for the public health nurses to try and tackle obesity. It is huge, and it's going to take a multi-agency approach. 46.3 per 100,000 children under the age of 18 have been admitted to hospital for alcohol-related issues, all followed up by school nursing, and 482.1 admissions for self-harm. And again, we will follow up. So depending on what level they come in at, they will get seen by mental health nurses, and then depending on their level, we will still always invite them to come and see us here at our schools in our drop-ins to follow up, just to make sure they're being supported, because sometimes they don't quite reach the criteria for CAMHS or other mental health services. And substance misuse, so 77.8 per 100,000 under 18 substance misuse admissions to hospital. Again, identifying these young people is what we do. And more recently, in the last few years, this is where child exploitation has become a higher priority, because we've got young people out there who are taking cannabis, other drugs, alcohol, and we're really nosy. School nurses are really, really nosy. We want to know where they're getting them from. We want to know who they're buying from them. And their stories unravel, and quite often it ends up that it needs to be referred in because they're maybe being exploited. So from the public health agenda, these are some of the areas that require improvement. They are not in any order. They are all really, really important. So obesity, as already said. Dental health in Herefordshire is really, really poor. There's no fluoride in the water. I didn't know that until I moved here. I said alcohol admissions, child exploitation, mental health and domestic abuse, and the pandemic has just highlighted that one even higher. So our role is to, I like this little puzzle. We say we make school nurses make pieces fit, because we have that privileged place in society where we have those close connections with school, we have close connections to home, to the community, to other agencies. And I think having that ability to go between all of these different agencies and to all these different areas in their life makes us quite accessible for families when they're looking for support. So in terms of health, we do health assessments. We do a lot of work around whatever's on the public health agenda. obesity, school readiness, dental health, all of those. We've made a fantastic video in school nursing. We've got video stars in the making at the moment. So if anybody wants to see that afterwards, I'm more than happy to share that with schools. But we've got a video on dental health. We also do the National Childhood Measurement Programme, which we will be starting again soon. And that is going to be a challenge, especially with PPE and keeping our children and young people safe and ourselves. And obviously we do referrals. Most of the referrals coming in are around emotional well-being. We support children and young people at a lower level and refer on if we need to. Lots of safeguarding, healthy eating, as it says there, child exploitation, self-harm and sexual health advice. The list goes on. For a young person who presents at our drop-in in our high schools, you never know what's coming through the door. And that's why we love our job so much, because it is, you just don't know. You have no idea what's coming in. So from a home perspective, we go in and we can do home visits. So quite often if there are worries at home and you can't quite put your finger on it, sometimes professionals will say, there might be something going on when there's a health issue that we're not quite sure, we can't, work out what's going on. We can go and do health visits. We don't do cold calling or anything like that. We just, we have to have a referral in and the parents need to consent. So you can't just send us in and say, go and fix them. We have to go in and get consent from the family to offer the support. And obviously it's up to them if they accept it. So we can do health assessments. And sometimes it's just identifying a need as a point of contact to actually refer on if we can't help or support that family. So supporting staff in schools, we are quite often contacted. We have a single point of access phone, which is accessible to all. We started this during the pandemic as a way to contact us, because when everything locked down, school nurses, we were still out there. We were still going into children's homes. Initially, it was all virtual. And then after the first few weeks of lockdown, we were allowed to get back out there, because I think it was a recognition there were a lot of young people out there not being accessed, not being seen. And that worried us, that really concerned us. So, we can support staff with some pupil behavioural support, identifying and supporting with safeguarding. We work really, really closely with the schools. So if they've got concerns, we've got concerns. It's about bringing that story together. It's about making that fit so that everybody knows exactly what's going on. We can identify and support with safeguarding and do individual health plans. And a lot of our work is done via the high school drop-ins. All high schools have a named nurse for a drop-in, and we come once a week, once a fortnight, depending on the school, and young people can come and see us. That did change slightly, obviously, with the pandemic. We have to do appointments only and not drop-ins. By the way, if I talk too much, Christine, please tell me to shush. So community health, so child exploitation, that recognition of it all, so actually identifying it. We have identified a lot more these days than we ever did. And working really closely with the health visitors, safeguarding, and basically the multi-agency approach, which we know works. So our role, as I said, is to protect the health and well-being of our children and our young people. So what changed during the pandemic? A lot. That was a bit of a scare for everybody, I think. So we know emotional well-being increased tenfold due to the anxiety for all these children and young people home. Mental health crisis, loneliness, school refusals, the children who didn't want to go to school don't want to go back to school, child exploitation, lots of things were happening online. Obesity has gone up. We'd be interested to know what the outcome of the NCMP this year will be, because they're already saying that the children and young people are more overweight than they were this time last year. Access for all. So we, like I said, we created a single point of access for young people. Young people have texted us, they WhatsApp us. We did virtual platforms to start with, telephone consultations, face-to-face continued with PPE. So we created a video, and we want to make more videos so we can access a bigger audience with support and advice. So the challenges for everybody, we all had challenges. Our drop-in numbers significantly reduced because obviously it's appointment only, whereas sexual health advice, the numbers dropped considerably because children and young people used to come for that advice in groups. and they're not allowed to anymore. They're not allowed to come as a group of 6 lads saying, Miss, I want to know all about condoms. That doesn't happen anymore. Those children are still out there, and we're working on how can we access these children now for mental health, and the impact on our own staff, the staff in our team. You know, there were people shielding, we had people having to stay home because they got the symptoms of COVID. Safeguarding numbers were declining, which was a big concern to us because of the hidden harm. We knew it was happening out there. And just as an example, one of our members of our team just happened to phone a mum up when we first went into lockdown, just to go, hey, how are you? And that actually burst into tears and told us everything was rotten and things were really awful at home in terms of domestic abuse. If our staff members hadn't been making those phone calls, some of these people would have had no access to anybody. And obviously A&Es had reduced, people weren't taking their children to A&E. We embraced the new way of working, I have to say. Working remotely from home became a challenge because we are nurses. Give nurses a computer, they're probably going to have a bit of trouble. We don't do computers, but we're getting better at it. The other challenge is being able to talk to the children and young people. So doing it remotely, we didn't know whether it was a confidential space for them. We didn't know whether they had parents in the background listening. We didn't know whether they could talk to us openly and freely. So for us as a team, lone working has meant supervision decrease. So we've reintroduced a way of working that and having meetings more often. So infection prevention, wearing PPE, that used to feel like a real barrier for these children and young people. But I think, as I said earlier, I think we're just used to it now. And even children just don't seem to bother. They're quite happy now. But initially it was really, really difficult. They're just used to seeing no face, and learning to read people's eyes and not their smiles or their sadness is again really, really difficult. And so yeah, trying to create video stars. So, most used phrase of the pandemic. Who hasn't said that? I've given up. Okay. So, any questions?
Okay, thanks for that, Wendy. Do you want to stop sharing your screen? And we've got a question in the box from Pauline. So I am going to bring Pauline in so she can come and talk to you. Give me 1 minute. Get the technology working. Pauline, would you like to unmute and
yeah. Hi. Hi. Thanks, Christine. Hi, Wendy. My name is Pauline Crockett, Herefordshire Council ward member. I also have the cabinet role for health and adult wellbeing. So, you know, I look at the bigger child, shall we say. It's really great to hear your passion. I really applaud that. It shows in buckets with your presentation. But my question really is about the childhood measurement program, the National Childhood Measurement Program. And I just wonder whether at the moment, should that be a priority? Because we've got much more pressing issues, I think, such as children's mental health, obesity, dental care. I just wondered why that was still high up there on the priority list.
We've all asked the same question. So yeah, no, I can understand why that question's come. Obesity, as you already mentioned, is high. And there is a lot of evidence out there. A lot of the community paediatricians are seeing children who are really, really not well because they're so overweight. So this was decided at Secretary of State level. This didn't come from anywhere from Herefordshire. This is a lot higher than our pay grades. And the decision was to take a percentage of the cohort that we normally would do, and then in September take up going back to what we did. There's a lot of work going into obesity at the moment. Public Health are putting together as literally as we speak, but we need to know what those numbers are. And I'm guessing that's probably why they want us to get this started. So we're not doing the full cohort, but it is really important because without those numbers, they don't know where we can target. Is it an area? is it the whole of Herefordshire? Is it, you know, it's being able to target where the support's needed, and there, you know, a lot out there. So I don't know whether that answers your question, but yeah, the Health Secretary of State decided, not me.
No, I didn't think it was a local decision by any means. But you know, at the end of the day, the government are there and we can challenge them. So I thank you for your answer. And yeah, if you need any support with anything, come and find me.
Thank you. I might have to.
Thank you for that, Pauline. Richard, do you have any comments to?
Yeah, I think the other thing I think it's important to remember is that mental health, and no other aspect of health either, operates in a silo. And there are strong links between mental well-being, physical well-being, energy levels, as well as social factors like housing and level of educational attainment. So I think although it's easy to think that it's not a good idea to do something like this, Secretary of State is right, and I should deny I ever said that.
Been recorded.
Yeah, but I guess we do need data, and it's also an opportunity for you to interact with people, which is probably part of the holistic approach that you would work to now. So I think any intervention is probably good news as far as your service is concerned for children and young people who've not had many interactions over the last year. So I think that's possibly worth remembering that. Thanks, Christine.
No problem, Richard. If anybody's got any questions for Wendy, please pop them in the chat before we move on to Ruth's presentation shortly. I just wondered, Wendy, whether I could ask for your reflections on what kinds of mental health issues are you seeing coming through that you think are more prevalent because of COVID?
Self-harm, those eating disorders, we are seeing lots of numbers of those. We had an increase from 10% follow-up of our A&Es. Like I said, we follow A&Es when they come through, if appropriate. In 1 month, went up from when they arrived back in school, have gone up to 16% in just a few weeks. And that's it's being recognised, they're back in school. So yes, so self-harm, overdoses is really on the increase. And eating disorders, we know that is. So looking forward to Ruth's presentation.
Yes,
so,
indeed.
Our team as well.
I also wondered about obesity and whether, what is the reason or how can parents and potentially other support networks help children with this increase in obesity because of COVID? Are they just eating because they can, because they're bored at home, or, what's going on and what can we do to help them?
If you talk to some of the young people, that's what they're doing. Some of them are eating because they're comfort eating. Some are bored, it's because it's there. And, we try and do work with children and young people who are obese, but we have to work with the parents. And for the parents we're working with, it's helping them identify what they're actually feeding their children. And some of them genuinely don't know. So I think there needs to be a lot more work out there for parents to help feed their children healthily and cheaply, because they haven't got any money. A lot of them, they haven't got any money and they don't know how to do it. On the flip side of that, so the more affluent families, they are just, it's all there for the taking when they want it. So I think that it's got to be a whole county approach to support parents, because I try and remind parents all the time, you do the shopping, and encouraging, if you speak to any family, any member who's got a smartphone, tell them to download the food scanner app. They could have a lot of fun with that, and it tells them how much sugar, fat, salt in the diets, and the children can join in with them, and they can walk around the supermarket with their parents, scanning everything on the shelf that's being bought. So it's just, helping them to actually work with their children and finding another way to buy the same foods but different, so a healthier version. Make your own meatballs rather than buying a tin of meatballs, that sort of thing. And sometimes they think it's more expensive, but actually, it cannot be. So yeah, they just need lots of help.
That's great. Do you have any more comments, Richard?
Yeah, the only other thing I think it's worth exploring with you, Wendy, is obviously the nature of these problems is that it needs a lot of teamwork across multi-disciplines. So you said a number of times you take referrals in, and I know you do some proactive work, but if you take a referral in, how do you actually work with the schools? Do you share data with them and information and reports, or are there kind of barriers between the organisations?
If the referrals are from a family, once the referrals, even if the referrals come from school, it is a confidential referral. So once the work started with the families, unless the parents allow it, then we don't always share that. We will and have done in the past. Again, everything's changed at the moment. Supported schools to have like healthy diet days, health watch days, if you like. So again, so we can work with the schools, but for single referrals for a family, that works slightly differently. We did try running before COVID, what we called Fit Families. They're trying to work with the families, but it didn't really work. So that we're trying to find another way that we can actually get whole school approaches. I mean, years ago, I remember going into schools and having sessions with parents, and it but sometimes it's the wrong parents that we can get a wrong parent. That's what I don't, it sounds a bit wrong, but the parents you would want to engage perhaps won't. So yeah. It's how you do that. A challenge.
Okay. Thank you, Wendy.
Okay, Wendy, so we're going to move on to Ruth, and you're welcome to stay and listen, Wendy, but equally if you've got lots to do, you're welcome to leave us too. But thank you for coming along and
thank you for having me.
Thank you. So Ruth, I wondered if you are there, whether you can unmute your camera, whatever the word is for that. Hi. So I did introduce you earlier, but I'm hoping you know how to share your screen if you've got anything to share, and I'm going to just hand over to you. And again, if people want to ask Ruth any questions, please pop them in the Q&A box and we'll come to them at the end of Ruth's presentation. So over to you, Ruth.
Okay, thanks, Christine. So before I start, Christine, could I just check with you who's in the audience, really, just roughly, so I've got some idea of background so I can pitch it right?
So I'm not entirely sure every person on the list where they work, but we've got Cabinet Member for Health and Wellbeing Adult Services. We have got the virtual head teacher, I believe, and we've got several other school staff, but I don't know what their roles are. Perhaps it would be helpful, attendees, if you could put in the chat what your role is and what your school is. Or organisation if you're not from a school.
That's great, thank you. I've just pitched the presentation for schools, really, so for advice for sort of recognition and things that people can do in the school setting. So I just wanted to check that I'd pitched it right, really.
Yeah, mostly it is school staff. Okay. Sometimes we get people from services that work in school, like school nursing team, and also some of the voluntary sector organisations that work with children and young people, but I can't see any of their names in the list. So we've got a student school nurse, a school nurse assistant. Any more? Anybody else willing to say who they are? They're just hiding in the background.
Don't worry, I'll crack on. And I've done a presentation. We can have questions at the end. We can chat more about things, or if there are specific things people want to ask about at the end, that's fine. Okay, I am now going to attempt to share my screen. Okay, let me know if this doesn't turn.
You can see that coming up.
Ruth, I take the lead for eating disorders in the CAMHS service in Herefordshire. We provide a specialist eating disorder service for children and young people up to the age of 18. So this presentation's really just, I've sort of done a very brief introduction. I'm sure most people here will know about eating disorders, will be aware of the diagnostic criteria, but I'm going to whiz through that a little bit, because I'm sort of thinking that people will know a bit about that, and it's maybe not so important that you know the sort of diagnostic stuff, but more going into a bit further in about the sort of signs and symptoms of eating disorders, what you might notice, what you might see in children and young people that would alert you. And then sort of moving on to what do you do? What would be useful? How can schools be helpful to young people who are suffering with eating disorders, or that you think might be suffering from an eating disorder? Okay, so this first slide I tend to show, if it will show, because this picture, I think that, you know, a lot of people have a sort of preconceived idea that somebody who has a life-threatening eating disorder is going to be skeletal, is going to look very unwell, is going to make you feel really concerned. And this picture, I think, is great at just demonstrating you cannot tell by looking at somebody whether they have a serious eating disorder, whether it's life-threatening. It's very hard to tell. Okay, so the main types of eating disorder, there are some I haven't listed on here, but the ones that most people are aware of are anorexia nervosa. So again, that's typical features are a very restrictive food intake, an intense fear of weight gain. Young people have distorted body image. They can purge, so they can make themselves sick, use laxatives, diuretics, but not always. Sometimes young people with anorexia will just have a very restrictive dietary intake. And often with the low body weight. So these are the people that you do see that do look very unwell. Bulimia nervosa, this is where you might have somebody who is not eating, so they've got a restrictive food intake, but they break that and then they binge. So unlike the young person with anorexia, they don't maintain that for days, weeks, months. They might maintain that for days or a week, and then their sort of dietary control breaks down and they tend to binge on food. And that's sort of characterized by a real sense of lack of control over that, not being able to stop. And there will be what we call compensatory behaviors. So they will make themselves sick, they might engage in intense activity, they might then restrict their food the next day or the next few days to try and compensate for the food they feel they've overeaten during the binge. Binge eating disorder, so very similar to bulimia, but the difference is that you don't have the compensatory behaviours, so you don't have the restrictive food intake or the purging. So often the people with binge eating disorder will present as overweight. I forgot to say actually, so bulimia nervosa, people are often normal weight, not always, but more often somebody with bulimia won't look any different really. ARFID is an eating disorder that we are seeing more and more of. This is becoming more common. ARFID stands for Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder, so a bit of a mouthful. And in short, really, this is about young people who don't meet their nutritional needs due to a fear of something bad happening. So that might be, these are the young people who are sometimes scared of choking, might have a fear of sickness. So the food restriction isn't driven by fear of weight gain or weight and shape issues. It's driven by a fear of something else. It doesn't always have to be that. Sometimes young people with ARFID aren't scared of anything, but maybe they have autistic spectrum disorder and there's something about the textures of food. So these are the young people who aren't meeting their dietary needs, not because of weight and shape concerns, but because of some other issue. ARFID diagnosis, you need to have sort of a nutritional deficiency alongside this and quite severe impaired psychosocial functioning. And then OSFED, this stands for Other Specified Feeding and Eating Disorders. So these are all your atypical presentations. So, and we're seeing an awful lot of these. So it sort of relates back to that first slide I've shown you, which is we are giving diagnoses of an atypical anorexia nervosa to quite a lot of young people at the moment. They may not have particularly low body weight, but they may have lost a lot of weight. They may have an anorexic mindset, so be very fearful of weight gain. And the presentation is very similar. So the atypical presentations of bulimia or anorexia are those that don't quite tickle the diagnostic criteria. Mindset is, and there are several other features of that disorder present. Okay. So I'm sure eating disorders have been so much in the news over this last year, because I think as Wendy was saying, we've had a dramatic increase in eating disorders since the pandemic. We're having 5 times as many referrals for people with severe eating disorders. It's unprecedented, really. Okay, so really delays in accessing treatment are related to
Ruth, could I just say your microphone's gone very quiet.
can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's still quite faint.
Okay, hang on. Let me have a look. What about now?
It's okay, but it's not
Is it?
that
It's
loud.
not brilliant. Okay, I'm a bit stuck to know how my volumes are up.
We'll just carry on if it's okay, if you don't know how to alter it.
Yeah, sorry. I can't think how else. On the computer. Can you hear better now?
If you want to just carry on and
Oh right, I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
yes.
Yes, am I back? Great. Okay. Just let me know if I disappear. So responding to eating disorders quickly and timely is absolutely essential in the prognosis of improving prognosis for young people with eating disorders. If we don't respond quickly, the evidence has shown that behaviours can become quite entrenched and are much harder to change. So without this early intervention, we can see that the average length of an illness can be 8 years for anorexia nervosa and 5 years for bulimia. So we've got new access and waiting time standards and sort of investment in eating disorders so that young people and adults can get quick access to specialist eating disorder treatment to try and bring about those changes early on. But what's going to be a really crucial part in that is people noticing and being able to support young people to be able to access those services. Eating disorders are complex with serious consequences for physical and mental health, and quality of life can be seriously affected. You know, when you meet adults who have had eating disorders for many years, you can see the impact of that on their day-to-day life, their relationships, that it affects all spheres of life. So this isn't what we want for our young people at all. One of the most staggering things really is that eating disorders have got the highest mortality rate of any other mental illness. So 20% of people die from medical complications or suicide. So the risks are enormous, which is again another driver for why we need that early intervention and that early change, because the risks are very, very high. Okay, can you recover from an eating disorder? Okay, so for people who suffer with anorexia nervosa, 46% can fully recover, 33% remain improving, and 20% sadly will remain chronically ill. So for bulimia nervosa, again, 45% for a full recovery, 27% for improving considerably, and 23% will suffer chronically. So it's not a quick fix illness, and for some people it might be a long journey. Okay, so the thing that's tricky about eating disorders is they're very secretive, they're very hidden, and people are often in denial that they feel great. So a young person who's just started has got an onset of an eating disorder, often they feel great. They feel like they're losing weight, they're getting compliments about how they look. For them, there are lots of things that reinforce the eating disorder. They're very unlikely to come forward and say, I'm struggling, I've got a difficult relationship with food. So it is reliant on other people noticing and maybe stepping in and offering some support, or maybe just sitting with them and thinking about what they may be struggling with. In terms of coming into GP surgeries, what we see is often people at the point where things are becoming difficult, they are becoming aware that things are not going well and there's been a marked deterioration. People, even at that point, young people and adults don't tend to come in and say, I think I've got an eating disorder. They'll often come and complain about sort of unrelated things, maybe tummy aches, emotional problems, talking about weight loss or weight gain. So these might be clues if young people start sort of complaining about these things, that maybe there's something else going on too that would be worth considering. Okay, so I don't want to bore you with lots of statistics, but it's just to sort of give you a bit of a heads up. So 25% of eating disorders with anorexia or bulimia are male, and 40% of those binge eating disorder are male. You know, we're seeing more and more young men suffering with eating disorders. And again, in the past, I think people have thought that eating disorders are primarily for women. Eating disorders can develop in children and adolescents and older adults. The youngest age that I've found being recorded as a case for a young person with anorexia has been 6 years old. And certainly, you know, we're seeing the onset of illnesses like anorexia at younger and younger ages. And again, at the other end of the scale, it's been known that women in their 70s have been diagnosed with the onset of anorexia. Again, they develop across all socioeconomic groups and from all cultural backgrounds. The high-risk groups are the people that are going to be more prone to developing an eating disorder are adolescents. The peak period for the onset of an eating disorder is between the ages of 12 and 25, with the median being around 18 years. Women, being female, makes it more likely. And another sort of thing that we notice is that particularly during transition periods, so this would apply to males too, is transitions can be difficult for people and they can be very tricky for young people. So going from primary school to secondary school, from secondary school to sixth form to university, those can be flashpoints. Those can be times when young people might start to develop an eating disorder and might start to display those signs. Pregnancy, body shape changing, and menopause are often other flashpoints. Athletes, so people who are engaged in competitive fitness, dance, and other physical activities are vulnerable to developing eating disorders. You know, there's a lot of pressure on young people, especially dancers and things, to look a certain way. Some sports in what you need to weigh to be able to participate in that sport, and those can all be big triggers for an eating disorder. And of course, we also know that family history, there's a genetic component to eating disorders too, for a lot of young people. So sometimes there is a history of eating disorders in the family. Okay, so the things you might notice, the signs and the symptoms of an eating disorder. So skipping meals, making excuses for not eating, adopting an overly restrictive vegetarian diet. I think I should amend this slide actually, because it's become very trendy to be vegan lately. And whilst that's, been a good life choice for a lot of people, for the young people that are vulnerable to developing an eating disorder, it's become a way of reducing food intake considerably. So you will often find when somebody presents with an eating disorder, they've happily eaten everything, and then all of a sudden they've become vegan. And that's not because they've been concerned about animal cruelty, or they've been reading about the benefits of a vegan diet. It will be that it's driven by eating disorder cognitions, about, this is a way I can lose weight, this is a way I can reduce my fat intake, etc. Excessive focus on healthy eating. So sometimes this can be where things start. We've certainly noticed over the pandemic that the focus on healthy eating that sort of took over at the sort of beginning of March. There was Joe Wicks and lots of things going on about healthy eating, exercise, was quite a flashpoint for a lot of young people in the development of an eating disorder. They started off wanting to sort of eat healthily and exercise, and things sort of become more and more rigid, more and more fixed, and deteriorate into an eating disorder. Making own meals rather than eating what the family eats. So often young people, families will sort of report that they were thrilled because their young person suddenly wanted to start to do the cooking, was taking over menu planning, which parents are often thrilled about, the thought of some help. But again, it can be a sign that if you're cooking the food and you're planning the menus, you're in control of it, and you're choosing low calorie options, or not putting in quite as much olive oil as the recipe says, or butter and things like that. And it's a way of being able to reduce the calorific intake of foods. It's just something else to watch out for. Young people can withdraw from their normal social activities. Often they're feeling really tired, they start to feel exhausted, they haven't got the energy to do things. Also, they become quite preoccupied with food, weight or shape, and they can't focus on anything else, so they start to tend to withdraw from those things. People might sort of talk or complain about being fat and talk about losing weight. You might notice people frequently checking in the mirror for perceived flaws, so you sort of see people scrutinizing themselves. Or, often you might see young people, they sometimes sort of put their hands around their wrists and things like that, sort of checking that their arms aren't getting bigger. So repeatedly eating large amounts of sweets or high-fat foods. So this is more sort of typical in the binge eating side of eating disorders. And less likely to notice the use of dietary supplements, laxatives or products for weight loss, but you might pick up on that. Some of the young people we've seen have been on the internet and been ordering things that have been sort of advertised as helping you to lose weight. Exercise is another thing to watch. Often young people, when eating disorders are starting to take a hold, normal exercise starts to increase, and then it becomes driven and compulsive. So young people starting to do workouts in their bedroom at night, going out for runs that get longer and longer. You sort of notice that the sort of extent and the amount of exercise starts to become quite excessive. Again, you might notice the calluses on someone's knuckles. Sometimes people use their knuckles to try and induce vomiting, so that can be sort of a little sign that you might notice. Problems with the loss of tooth enamel. So again, if they're vomiting to sort of compensate for food eaten, it's going to damage your teeth. Something that this is one of the more common signs is often young people might get up and use the loo during meals, or sort of disappear halfway through a meal, or take a long time in the bathroom after a meal. Those are things that would sort of be red flags too. Eating much more in a meal or snack than's considered normal. Expressing depression, disgust, shame or guilt about eating habits. Eating in secret. Sometimes we have parents sort of saying they found stashes of food or wrappers under their child's bed. And poor concentration and fatigue. Now this one, I didn't do very well cut and pasting this slide in, but the Beat website has is a great source of information. It's got some really helpful sort of resources, and they developed a poster that they sent out to all the schools. And so you might well have seen this, and they talk about sort of the signs of an eating disorder, and they talk about flips, lips, kips, hips, skips and nips, which is quite a good way of remembering the things that you need to be looking out for. So flips, is their behaviour changing? So thinking about, are they becoming sort of isolated? Are they sort of disappearing? Are they becoming more withdrawn? Lips, are they obsessive about food? So thinking about those behaviours we've just talked about, in terms of maybe wanting to change their diet, looking on apps. We have a lot of young people on Instagram and places looking at things, looking at other people's meal plans. KIPS, are they often tired or struggling to concentrate? That's something you might notice at school a lot more. It's often young people saying, I can't read, I can't listen, I can't remember anything from my lessons. Their concentration's been really, really impaired. Hips, do they have distorted beliefs about their body size? So, you know, when they're talking, saying I'm really fat, I look really big, or my thighs are disgusting, and actually you're looking at them and thinking there's hardly anything of you. Skips, have they started exercising excessively? And nips, do they disappear to the toilet after meals? Okay, so when we're thinking about support in schools and what support would be helpful to a young person, I've put raise a concern. If you're worried, if any of those signs, when you're thinking about the things we've gone through and something's alerting you to the fact you think a young person might have an eating disorder, it's really important to be able to raise a concern with them if you feel that you can. Often people avoid saying anything, they don't want to upset the young person, you know, and often other young people are saying to someone, oh, you look great, you've lost loads of weight, but actually what they mean is you look really thin and I'm really worried about you. And that young person doesn't really need to hear that, because that reinforces the eating disorder. What they need to hear is that somebody's quite right, there's somebody there to help them. So maybe find a quiet time to raise your concern with them. And maybe, you know, not go straight in there sort of saying, I think you might have an eating disorder. It's maybe just sort of say, oh, you know, think about what you've noticed, think about what it is you're concerned about, and sort of maybe open up the conversation. So sort of think, oh, you know, I've noticed that you really seem to be struggling with your friend so-and-so, or is everything okay? Bullying can be quite a big trigger for the development of an eating disorder. So sometimes people find it easier to talk about issues that have preempted the eating disorder, and then you sort of get to the way they're managing that, in terms of maybe if they've been teased about how they look, then they said, well, I'm going to eat really healthily from now on, and then you can open up that conversation with them. It can be really helpful to ask them if you can help. I'm sure everyone would do this anyway, but you know, you can really think schools can have a massive impact on young people with eating disorders. I mean, I work with lots of people in lots of the schools across Herefordshire, and I've been really impressed with the support that teachers are offering to the young people with disorders that we have open to us in CAMHS. You know, when we've thought together with teachers, with the support systems in school, we've been thinking, what would make a difference? You know, if lunchtime's difficult, you know, I've got no one to sit with and eat lunch, or you know, by the time I get to the canteen there's nothing left, or the sort of things that sometimes young people say, you can actively help them problem solve that. So, you know, would it help if we sort of reserve something at the canteen for you that we know you like, you know, so that you can really problem solve with the young people about what would make the difference, what, you know, you need to eat, you need to be able to eat regularly, you need to be able to eat good sort of healthy food and a balanced diet. How can we help you with that? Encourage to discuss with the school nurse. So once you've got there, and maybe there's some acknowledgement of difficulty or eating disorders, and that you're worried about them, or you're worried about their health, because maybe they're struggling with food or doing too much exercise, encourage them to go to the school nurse, or you could encourage them to go to the GP, or even offer to maybe speak to parents. Young people really don't know often how to make that first step, and might feel really frightened about making that first step. So there might be somebody in their system, in school, or, you know, in the professional teams around young people, that they feel a bit of a connection with, or feel that they feel safe enough to be able to go to. We like in CAMHS, we always ask young people to go to the GP as a sort of first step, because the GP can do a full physical health assessment and take bloods, which is all really important in the risk assessment. So with exactly like the first slide, we can't tell by looking at someone if they're all right or not. If you've been restricting your food intake significantly, there can be considerable damage to your cardiac system. And so it's really important that we get those physical health checks to just see if they're okay or not. That then sort of really affects the speed of our response. If we're seeing a young person that's being really physically compromised, we often make contact the same day, or at the very least the next day. If people seem to be physically and it's the early stages, you know, we might not jump straight in, and we might sort of invite them in for an assessment the following week or something like that. Talking about exercise in moderation and food as fuel. Oh, sorry, I've missed a bit there actually. Let me wind back. So thinking about safeguarding issues, that is part of when you've got to that point and you are thinking with the young person about your concerns. It is thinking about, always have safeguarding in your mind. If a young person is fainting, if they have got lots of physical symptoms, if they're telling you they're not eating at all, then that's really, really concerning. If they're then saying to you, I don't want you to tell anyone, you need to consider the safeguarding issues around that. You know, a young person's health can be really, really significantly impacted by poor nutrition or excessive exercise. Okay, so talking about food as fuel can be really helpful. So often young people who tend to develop eating disorders are very perfectionist, very high achieving, very driven young people, often do very well at school. Not always, but as generally that tends to be a personality type. When you start talking to them about the impacts of poor nutrition on the brain, it's quite a big motivator. It's, you know, they're really quite motivated by thinking, well, I've been getting really good grades, I work really hard, I don't want to jeopardize that. So it can be really helpful for teachers and people around the young person to be saying, you know, food is fuel. We need your brain working, we need you to do well in your exams. You know, we need to help you to hydrate, to have some healthy food, to eat regularly. Again, exercise in moderation. So, you know, some young people are really sporty. I mean, I've got a number of young people that sort of pre-morbidly will have been doing a sports club every night of the week, which is fine if you're eating well and you can fuel that exercise. Where it all starts to go a bit wrong is if you're doing a lot of exercise and you're eating a really restrictive food intake. So it's just sort of being able to talk about that and sort of role model how, you know, sport's great, exercise is great, we're really, really promoting that, but it's about the healthy, balanced diet to go with it. Okay, rest is good. So a lot of the young people with eating disorders that present are really driven, it's relentless, they're exhausted, but their eating disorder is pushing them to study until it's absolutely perfect, to stay up late, to finish schoolwork. You know, they have to do so much exercise a day. It's that sort of driven, compulsive, perfectionist side of eating disorders just adds to the exhaustion, adds to the drain on energy for young people. So again, the role modeling, the messages we like to give to young people is it's about everything in balance. It's about eating regularly, it's about a balanced diet, it's about drinking enough fluid, it's about exercising regularly but not too much and not too little, and that rest is an important part of that too. You know, that's when our bodies repair and heal. It's when our brains sort of recalculate and absorb the information we've been learning. It's vital to doing well. And often eating disorders are telling them that rest is bad, that you're lazy if you rest, you're not allowed to sit down and watch TV. So as adults around young people with eating disorders, it's really important to role model that these things are important and sort of maybe give them clear messages around that too. Model healthy behaviours around food and exercise. There are lots of opportunities in schools to open up the conversation about eating disorders. In, you know, talking about the impact of social media on body image, thinking about the sort of the ideals that are presented to young people. Young people are often really, really keen to engage in conversations around that. there are lots of resources on the BEAT website for schools to be able to use in school assemblies and PSHE lessons, which can be really helpful. Yeah, I've covered that. Okay, I put this in. I don't know whether this is useful or not, but I was just really super aware that a lot of our young people are being supported in schools by teachers, teaching assistants, to eat their lunch or have their morning snacks as part of their meal plan that they've developed as part of their treatment package. And I just think sometimes we work individually with schools and sort of help give them the support around how to behave with a young person, what that young person as an individual needs to be able to complete their meal plan. But in general, these are the sort of things we talk about in your approach. So if you are supporting someone to have their lunch or a snack whilst they're at school, we talk about being firm but fair. So sometimes young people say, well, I'm not going to have that, or I don't want that, or I don't have that at home. And so again, it's about sort of saying, but this is what your mum and dad have sent in with you, or this is what CAMHS have agreed you're going to have. But maybe we can think about, do you want to have it in a different room? Is there one of your friends you'd like to come with? So you can sort of think with them. To, but equally with an eating disorder, if you take a mile, so say, well, we need to have this food, but maybe you would like to, often we give them choices about which plate they want to use.
Hi, Ruth, I think you're freezing. I wasn't sure if it was just me, but it looks like it's not.
Okay, avoid numbers. So we don't talk about numbers in terms of weight or goals and things like that with young people. Often people get very hung up on a number and they're weighing themselves a lot, and numbers become terribly important. So we avoid talking about numbers to young people if at all possible. Again, another thing, it seems counterintuitive when you can see a young person struggling so much, but it's to avoid praise. Young people with an eating disorder, if you say, oh, you've done really well, you've eaten all your lunch, your parents will be really pleased. That can be very triggering for the eating disorder, in terms that they will have lots of thoughts around, well, if they think you've done really well, that means you've done really badly in terms of being able to control the amount of food you've eaten. So it sort of turns it on its head. So we avoid praise and sort of acknowledging, saying, right, okay, you finished that, let's go and do this now. Emphasize safety. So huge amounts of anxiety around eating for people with eating disorders often. So talking about safety, making young people feel safe, trying to reduce anxiety as much as possible is a really, really key skill to supporting someone to eat. So just letting people know when we sit and eat with people, we're sort of saying, know you're frightened about this, I know you're worried about this, but actually food's your medicine. This is what's going to give you some energy. This is what's going to keep you safe. It's okay. Supportive but not collusive. So again, it's very easy to get caught up with eating disorder. Usually there's lots of negotiation around, I don't want a milkshake, but I'll have this instead. You can end up colluding with the eating disorder if you say, oh, okay, then, just thinking I'm pleased they're having something, but the cereal bar is actually less than the milkshake in terms of calories. So you can be supportive and say, oh, I know you want the cereal bar, but actually the milkshake's on your meal plan. It's got lots of really good nutrition in it, and that's going to be really good for your bones. But I can see that you like cereal bars. Maybe we can have a think about putting a cereal bar in somewhere else. We'll have a chat with you know, your parents or the professionals will have a think about that. So they feel heard, they feel supported, but you're not clued in with the eating disorder. Another weird one, main treatment approaches with eating disorders is about externalizing the illness. So it's really, really a hard concept to get your head around, what it's like to have an eating disorder. And a lot of young people have sort of described it in terms of having a bit of a devil sat on their shoulder. So it's like having a little, some people describe it as a little monster, or it's something that's not the young person, but whispering in their ear and telling them things about food or about how they look or what's going to happen. So in terms of treatment, we very much are separating the eating disorder from the young person. They are not their eating disorder. So we will talk to them about, your eating disorder is giving you a really hard time at the moment, isn't it? You know, I can see that. What can I do to help? Should we go and have a look out the window? Should we put the radio on? Do you want to listen to a podcast? So all the time, you are then demonstrating to the young person, just because you've got these thoughts doesn't mean you've got to listen to them. They are the eating disorder. So you're doing lots of things therapeutically and being really supportive. Is you're helping them identify what's an eating disorder thought. You're reflecting back to them that actually this eating disorder is making them really anxious, impact on their behavior, and you're able to role model and demonstrate how to manage that. So you then put in place a coping strategy or something distracting, so they start to learn how to manage those situations where their eating disorder's getting loud. Okay. Communication with parents and professionals. I've put reduced splitting. That's a bit of psychobabble. But in terms of eating disorders, they're very powerful illnesses, and they are very, very tricky. And what we see happen, we call it splitting, is the eating disorder tries to create conflict, tries to create splits between people. So this is where you see young people say, but mum said I could have that. And they're going, well, it's not on your meal plan. And saying, well, mum said, so that it's just trying to put wedges in between people, create disagreement, create conflict. Often, you know, young people go to school and say, well, Ruth at CAMHS said I could do something of the sort, but they sort of pitch people against each other. That's not the young person, that's the eating disorder. It's the eating disorder trying to create maximum chaos, because if there's lots of chaos and lots of conflict, then people take their eye off the ball in terms of what needs to happen around managing the eating disorder. So we try to work really closely with everybody involved in that young person's life, or who's going to be involved around food, so that everyone's on the same page. It's quite time consuming, it's quite laborious trying to do it, but you know, emailing, just keeping each other in the loops, and I've made a change to the meal plan, or this happened in school today. Keeping lines of communication open, so that young person sees actually there's nowhere for this eating disorder to create those conflicts, to create those splits. It helps them to feel safe. It can feel like you're being really controlling, but ultimately the young people, when they've recovered, the feedback we get is, do you know what, that really helped, because I just knew that I could say to my eating disorder, I'm not going to get away with it, so I'm not even going to try. It gave them something to fight with. So these boundaries and these communications around the eating disorder can be really powerful.
Ruth, can I stop you there if that's okay, because we've only got 10 minutes left, and it'd be quite good to have a bit of discussion and see if anybody has any questions for you. It's really interesting, and it also ties in with some of the school nursing presentation around obesity and children potentially seeing an increase in overeating during the last 12 months. And I know that we have had an increase in referrals to the CAMHS service around eating disorders. When is overeating more than just overeating and becomes an eating disorder?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because what we would sort of advise with young people that are overweight and obese is that it's always worth screening for a binge eating disorder. So when you think about the diagnostic stuff for binge eating, you know, eating uncontrolled feeling uncontrolled, eating large amounts of food within a sort of 2-hour frame period. It's quite different with binge eating disorder in terms that people start, they can even eat things that are non-food items. It's that absolute sort of driven behavior around eating. People will talk about going to the fridge and eating blocks of butter. It's not normal eating, it's not comfort eating. It's when it's just about putting something in and just stuffing it down and being completely unable to stop. It's that lack of control. So, when we're comfort eating, we sort of think, oh, I'm going to have another biscuit, or God, I've eaten half a packet. But you sort of put the brakes on. You've overeaten, maybe. You probably shouldn't have had as much as you have, but you can put the brakes on. You can take some control. Binge eating disorder, you tend not to have that. It goes on past that. You're full, but you keep eating. You feel sick, but you keep eating. So it's got a really sort of driven element to it. And then again, I might eat too many biscuits and afterwards be able to go, oh, actually, that's fine. It's not the end of the world. But somebody who's got a binge eating disorder, the levels of shame, the levels of guilt that they will feel after eating are huge. So that it's about the emotional reaction to the binge eating as well. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah. Richard, do you have any comments or questions for Ruth?
Yeah, there's something uneasy in my mind about where we are now. We know that this incidence, the prevalence, of eating disorders is on the increase. And I just had a sharp intake of breath, Ruth, when you said early intervention is vital if you're going to reduce the length of the illness. And yet, I think we've got quite a complicated pathway to get from, somebody on the front line in a school to the appropriate service, because it has to go via a GP, which means the parents involved, and they may or may not be on board with the suggestion from the school. And I just wonder if there's some way round all of this to get that early intervention, especially now that actually it's quite difficult to see a GP. In fact, you can't see a GP. You can talk to one on the phone. And I do have one case where the gatekeeper in the surgery turned down an eating disorder referral because they didn't think it was important. So I just wonder how you're going to cope with that over the coming weeks and months, really.
Yeah, it's a fair point. And I think, in Herefordshire, there's hopefully going to be more investment in our eating disorder service. We're very limited, we're very small, and we've been under-resourced for a very long time. But I think there's recognition now that the amount of young people with eating disorders has increased beyond, and that this is something that needs some urgent action. So, I'm pleased that we're hoping to expand our team in the near future, which is really welcome news. But with that expansion, I think we're still going to be really pushed, being realistic. But I would like to be able to think, at the moment we're very limited because it's just firefighting. We're seeing young people with eating disorders, but I would like to see a lot more sort of training going into sort of tier one, sort of being able to get out into schools, to be able to get out into GP practices and sort of skill people up about the identification, give people information about what to look for, what they can be doing in the early stages of an eating disorder that would make a massive difference. So, if you catch, often you could, I really noticed this, if you catch an eating disorder early, it doesn't need an awful lot and it's not incredibly complicated. Giving a young person some good messages around food and exercise. Most of these young people do not want a life-threatening illness, but they didn't know that's where it could go. So just sharing that sort of information with people in itself can turn things around. It's not rocket science sometimes. So I think it's about how we give it. I'll say something controversial really, but I think it's really difficult, isn't it, when there's a lot of focus on obesity at the moment, a lot of fear around obesity. So there's lots of messages around healthy eating and looking at the fat content of food. Yeah, I know that a lot of young people that come in go, I can't eat anything with a red label on it. And you're saying, but things like nuts are going to have a red marker on, but they're really good for you. So it's how do we educate young people about balance? Because that's the bottom line, isn't it? Is that what is a healthy diet? You know,
I guess that this is a good point to bring Wendy in, who's got her hand up. Wendy's from the school nursing service. Wendy, do you want to comment?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking the same Ruth, that yeah, it's that balance out there. But I just came to mind a couple of years ago when one of my high schools I was working in at the time had quite a few young people with an eating disorder at the time. I can't actually remember how it came to me, but I went out and I put together a presentation with help from your team to the whole school, so we're not singling people out. So maybe getting more information out.
I remember talking to you about it, Wendy. I know the case.
But that might get a whole school approach.
Yeah.
And getting those young people in earlier. So those people who are perhaps teetering on an eating disorder, getting that information out there that they can get to somebody sooner before it gets to become a problem, it might be the way we can start putting a halt on some of those numbers going up and up and up.
And I think, you know, it is, isn't it? Because whilst we're really super aware that a lot of young people are developing serious eating disorders such as anorexia, we've also got an awful lot of young people who are becoming overweight, which is as dangerous in terms of health in the long term. So it's how we give information, isn't it? That's saying, actually, there's no such thing as a bad food, because I think sometimes the messages we're given is you can't have crisps, you can't have biscuits, you can't have cake. And you know, we need to get rid of these out of the school tuck shops. We need to they're not healthy. But actually, is it about being able to give choice and say there's no such thing as a bad food? It's all about the amounts and proportion of it. So actually, you want to be having quite a lot of fruit and vegetable in your diet, but you're going to need, we call them fun foods. You're going to need some fun foods too, because food is about enjoyment. It's about pleasure. It's important that you have things in moderation that you enjoy, because actually if you don't, you're more likely to crave them and overeat them at other points. So it's giving our young people some really clear messages, I think, about food and about exercise, because I think they're quite confused. I think that the messages they get can be quite conflicting sometimes, with the best will in the world. So I think, you know, you're right, Wendy, that school assembly you did, I remember it now, and we were talking about those sort of pillars of what are the things we need to be healthy. And, you know, we talked about rest, we talked about fluids, didn't we? We talked about balanced nutrition. It's all these things that are really important. Sleep, we talked about. We didn't just focus on food, did we? We were just saying, what are the things that we need to thrive?
Yeah,
and what happens if one of those goes out of sync?
Recognizing it, that's the bit, isn't it? And it's okay to have a chocolate every now and again.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, we know that when people restrict things and have strict rules about things, you tend to break them and then eat far more than you'd have ever done if you just had a bar of chocolate when you fancied it. So it's those sort of things, isn't it? I could go on for hours. I'll sort of
Yeah, so we're almost out of time, and I'm going to hand over to Richard to wrap up and sort of end the session. But thank you very much, both.
Yeah, I'd like to thank both our speakers, Wendy, who's the practice lead from the school nursing service, and Ruth, clinical lead from the eating disorder service. It's usual to say that was very interesting. Actually, some of that was quite frightening. And I do hope that people listening to this and who listen afterwards get some value out of it. And I'm thinking in my head that we maybe need as Health Watch to pick some of these issues up further downstream, Christine. We have an embryonic Youth Watch service of young children in year 7 and 8 who do work for us, particularly on mental health. And maybe we can do something on attitudes to food. I'll put it in that widest sense, because I think you're right, balance is right. And maybe we can do something like that. So thank you to both of you. Thank you to those who've tuned in to listen to this. We've had a little bit of feedback about future events, and I know self-harm and body image featured in that, which of course feed into exactly this conversation today. So we'll take that away, and hopefully Ruth and Wendy, you'll be happy to come back at some point, maybe even physically, and actually give us another talk on this, maybe downstream, when some of these issues that have arisen on COVID have borne fruit, and maybe hopefully we've beaten some of them. So thank you both very much. Thank you to all the people listening. We don't have a date for the next forum, but we will be sending out the slides of this one and the details hopefully in the near future. So thank you for everybody. Good night.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.